our speaker today, Lesley Finlayson. Lesley was born in Scotland. She graduated with honors from the Glasgow School of Art, that wonderful Charles Rennie Mackintosh building. And she received her Master's of Fine Arts from the University of Calgary. And she has received numerous grants and awards, including the Elizabeth Greenshield Scholarship in 1983. And she is a former department chair and instructor in fine arts at Langara College in Vancouver, and is now a full-time painter. Lesley's had numerous solo exhibitions in Canada and the United Kingdom. Her work is included in corporate and private collections in North America and abroad. And she recently had a show, last fall, she had a show at Winchester, which is where I first became acquainted with Lesley's work. So I would like to welcome Lesley to the AGGV Associates April meeting. We're looking forward to your talk, Lesley, and to seeing your studio. Thank you.
Okay. David and Caroline, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation today. David, I'm sorry we're not in the studio. I couldn't get an internet connection down there, and like everybody else, I do not like any more technical challenges than I have to deal with. So we'll get a sense of the studio through my work. Well, I'm going to whip through a lot of slides. I tried my hardest to keep culling and culling, but there are, to sort of enforce my way of working, there are quite a few. So you will notice the slides are numbered. And if at the end you would like me to flash back to one to talk about it maybe a bit further, because I'm not talking about them individually, more as groups, I'd be more than happy to do that. Any hesitation I had in accepting this offer to talk about my work came from the belief that it is sort of the unspoken qualities that are ultimately the strength of my kind of working. It doesn't really need much expansion. The language is in the paint. But having said that, I think you can always get a greater understanding of a piece of work when you understand the journey the artist has taken behind the scenes to get to this painting in this moment in time. So I've started off with a few because Caroline said to me that maybe some of you had seen my show at the Winchester. So this is indeed the latest work, some of the latest pieces, just a few of them. And I had been in Victoria for 2 years at this point. I'd come out of having done a series of paintings all around Mount Tolmie, and I just carried on with expanding my exploration of Victoria, which was my new home. And interestingly, a lot of the drawings and stuff that went with these happened literally a month before COVID clamped down. And it was always my plan to move into the studio at that point and pursue them. So these are from, that's actually somewhere in Salt Spring, Quadra, that was up at Port Renfrew at Botanical Beach. So that's where I am now. And I thought, it was important to begin with where I am at this point, but then I'd like to go on and sort of explain my route, how I got there. Starting off in Aberdeenshire, I was immersed in the Scottish landscape. We were semi-rural, but not completely rural. But we certainly explored the whole time. The coast, if any of you are familiar with it, is a very distinctive northeast coast, and I, did a lot of, picnics, birthdays, everything. It was just, you were immersed in that place. These drawings I'm showing you alongside them, they weren't done when I was a kid, they were done later. But they're the places, and I think these early years of a landscape, just Conrad spoke about that, they define your inner landscape, what you seek, somebody who's grown up in a rainforest looks to different things, and such as somebody who's grown up in the prairies or something, different horizons, different color. And I feel that's very influenced my work along the way. I had the great fortune of being in a community where there were artists and musicians, and you know, spending a whole day out drawing was seen as a valid concern. And I don't know too many young adults get that kind of wonderful exposure, but I did, that it was a valid way to spend your time. So I was encouraged to go to art school, and I chose Glasgow School of Art. And Glasgow at that point was renowned for its painting faculty and department. And again, you know, just that idea was slowly being nurtured and supported in me pursuing this. Glasgow had an affiliation with Culzean Castle, which was on the Ayrshire coast, and you would go down there and spend weeks painting. They had a kind of, you know, hostel type situation. They had exquisite, exotic gardens that I do see when I look back on my work now. I had a tendency to pick out, you know, that not the local flora and fauna, it was more the unique little bit to that point. Same time I was further on in art school, I had the great privilege of being one of 3 students from each of the 4 art schools that went to Hospital Field House, which was set, it's just in Arbroath, and it was given over to the arts at the turn of the century. And a lot of, you know, Scotland's finest painters had come through there. One of them and that was my studio. And again, it's just all that sort of instilling that this is a real thing to do. And one of the great artists that had gone through Hospital Field was Joan Erdley, and she painted outside on that northeast coast. You know, sometimes I think she was virtually staked down so she didn't blow away. Very much like, you know, something I was kind of interested in, the sort of drama of the landscape. And here's 2 of her wonderful paintings. And if any of you know the Northeast coast, you know, she's just nailed that color of the sea in relation to the land when a wee bit of light comes out. And they're very, very powerful, influential paintings. Coming out of art school, I'm just whipping through the education here. I had, thank you Canada, a lovely scholarship called the Elizabeth Greenshields, and it was really to just pursue anything in your education. And I had heard about this college, Cyprus College of Art, and thought it just sounded marvelous because, you know, there'd be sun and things like that. So went off there, and that was a fabulous experience. The sort of premise of it was all you had to have was a degree in fine arts, and you were basically on your own. And it was clever because I think in some ways anybody can make art when they're in the right environment, getting instruction, getting feedback, getting praise, all that kind of stuff. But it's a very different beast to go out there and actually just start making it on your own. And that opportunity in Cyprus really consolidated that was something that I wanted to do. And these were paintings, you know, you come from Scotland, you're northeast of Scotland, and you're exposed to a country that is like, I think, sunshine every day of the year. It yields 3 crops a year. The place was just lush, abundant. These were all the little banana trees, donkeys, and I was quite taken with it. And of course the amazing history of Cyprus came through in how you looked at the landscape. I mean, just about everybody dropped off in Cyprus and left their mark, and it was a very deeply rich place and wonderful people. So that came back, and I you know, was very, very keen to carry on, but how do you do that really? So I had the good fortune to again, it is about who you run into and people that tell you things and stuff. At that point in Scotland, it wasn't particularly common to go and do MFAs. They weren't an abundant thing to be doing. It wasn't the obvious next step, which it is now. And somebody said, well, you should go to North America. So I sent out applications to just about, you know, lots of them in the States, a good handful in Scotland, Canada, but not doing research like people do now, and how I would encourage my students to do research. But I got such a wonderful response from the University of Calgary, and it it provided the money, which was going to be the stumbling block about doing anything, by offering me a teaching assistant type thing. And wonderful faculty and fellow students there that again just sort of instilled my belief that this was something I could do. Responding to that huge landscape, because that was my first time in North America, I did these drawings that were, no longer from the wrist. I wanted them to be full body drawings coming from the shoulder and sort of almost, create a really physical dance type relationship to the landscape. These are appalling slides because I didn't keep very good records, but it gives you a sense of the scale. Here's the little ones that I go out into landscape and do on site. And then here are the biggies that I do back in the studio. This was about a painting. This was a drawing from the memory of a treehouse. So again, just a stat made me, 2 years of luxury to research and confirm why you wanted to work the way you did. And of course, it introduced me to teaching, which I completely fell in love with, and have done that. Well, I did it for 23 years thereafter until, certain things in my life changed and I stopped. So also, when you start to teach, your time's no longer your own. So I had to think about, how am I going to work? So the summers became very precious to me. I had to get out there, do my form of research, which is about going out into a landscape and drawing and sourcing my material. And then come September, when the discipline of teaching sets in, I have a cohesive body of work to work from that I can then work progressively through the year. And I would say the teaching was almost a gift, because you had to leave the painting and allow it to sit and then come back with a fresh eye later in the week. So that's one of my first terms, or 2 terms into teaching. The spring rolled round, grueling term, you're glad to pop out the end. And a friend said, I'm going to Alaska. She had a fabulous scholarship thing to go and do that. And I said, well, I'm coming with you. So we arrived in Anchorage, and it was like spring was just waking up. The sounds of the water flowing, everything was awakening. It was quite insane. In fact, the very first night we arrived, we hired a car and we were going along the coast. And we said, why are all these cars pulled over? So like typical tourists, we pulled over, and there was a huge pod of belugas singing their way up this channel. And that literally set the tone of that whole magical trip. So I drew everything, really. And then as the trip progressed, I started to settle in on these wonderful icebergs. And then the amazing thing about looking at icebergs from a drawing perspective, if I'd gone in there with a camera, click, click, really nice picture of these icebergs, and then I would leave. But in the duration of a drawing, you see that iceberg started off here, and 1 hour later, it's now down here. This little bit's now under the water, and you realize that the whole thing, it's all very silent. Well, it's not very silent, it's very quietly, non-dramatically done. It's just constantly rolling. And I really loved and responded to that. And that's what made me decide I would work with those in the studio. Once again, another poor slide demonstrating how I work. I put the images up. I very early realized that, of course, photographs are a very valuable source to many, many people. But for me, they actually were kind of stifling, because, of course, a camera doesn't edit. All information is equal to a camera. And I like drawing because it lets me begin the editing process right from the get-go, and I can let go a bit, so I don't see as integral to where it's all going. These paintings actually took about 2 years. They were long, heavily worked, big oil paints. This is is about 6x4. Excuse me, 4x4. And you can see evidence of canvas on there. And I did put canvas on some of them. And the idea was that it would be suggestive of the ghost of the previous image. And then that would kind of, the next painting would kind of shift on from that. And, again, it was coming very clear to me that when you paint and draw, you are drawing to the visual, but you are responding to the sounds and the foliage and the color, how the light behaves, how in some landscapes really things are only described by the shadows they cast. And I love that kind of sustained observation, moving past the sort of big picture and homing in. And I also, my few little trips that I'd had to that point, the excitement of Cyprus, very different bright light from Scotland, now immersed in Vancouver, getting very familiar with that landscape, moving to Alaska. Again, it was the excitement of arriving and being sort of jolted into a kind of heightened sensitivity to experiencing things that, that really was important to my way of working. And I mean, I could hardly claim it was what a genuine explorer would experience. It's nothing like that, of course, but somewhat trying to emulate the wonder and trying to bring that to the audience that might one day see these paintings. So that was that body of work. Then back to school, I'd worked on those paintings actually for 2 years. So I think probably the following year I was back in Scotland and then came back into the term. And I decided, on that trip, it had been very difficult to actually do a lot of drawing. So I just had little notation, but I decided that was going to be the point of this body of work. These were very familiar landscapes to me and very, very, known landscapes. So I wrote, the work in this show concentrated on the coast, choosing as the parameters of memory and the massive formations of land and cliffs on one hand, and the elusive line of the North Sea horizon on the other. The romantic concept of looking to the horizon to find order amidst chaos in nature is perhaps a metaphor for my painting process, in which the memory is gathered, then reconstructed as a visual dialogue between order and chaos. And at a certain point, the paint is directing that as much as the physical landscape I'm looking at. So there. Then, again, you're moving along, and I realized when a body of work was done, and by done, I mean I had exhausted all the kind of, the number of images I wanted to make of that. And it didn't necessarily stick to, that one scene. I might, move my vantage point like I did in the Winchester show, but the sort of maybe the approach to the painting. Once I'd run that course, it became clear to me that drawing is critical to my recalibrating and deciding where I was going next. So these drawings started off in a loch up in the Hebrides in Scotland, but I didn't do them all there. I came back and a lot of these were done out at what's it called? The bird sanctuary at Ladner in Vancouver. And so, just looking at light and water. And they were drawings, and then they were drawings that moved sort of onto canvas, but I'm obviously bringing in paint now and working the linear that the charcoal and the pastel work offer, and then with great waves and washes of the acrylic paint. These were more acrylic because I was working on the untreated canvas. I wanted the interplay of the fluidity of that, and then little pockets of structure to just like hang on to, somewhat like life. Then moving right along, life is a series of chance encounters, really, when you think about it. I had the chance to go to Cyprus. I had the chance to go to Alaska, things like that. But when teaching at Langara, they had a program called the Fraser River Studies. And that gave me an amazing opportunity. They invited me to come down the river with them on the raft and camp on the beach at night. And what a privileged perspective to see that landscape from these different points of view and be immersed in it, go to sleep in it and wake up in it. Let me just see what I've got here about it. Fraser River, yes. The students were, I also had such a fascinating perspective on all of this, because there was chemistry students in the water doing their schooling. The English teacher had them reading Fraser's journal as they came down the Fraser River. So again, it was that full experience. And, from this, you can remember I can remember conversations with people, moments in time, being so hot in that insane heat. I did throw myself into the Fraser River on occasions, which is a damn dangerous river, so a stupid thing to do, but the heat was ferocious. And going through these narrow passages, the thrill of being on a raft and getting tossed around, it was pretty exciting. And this way of, I did many bodies of work through my good fortune of being connected with this group. I haven't shown them all, but I spent a lot of time in the grasslands, and it's an amazing landscape. If it's one thing that we probably should all learn from this COVID thing, is just, explore your own province. It's truly astounding, which I'm sure many of you have done, but it was new to me at the time. And carrying on that way working, I kind of slid down the coast to Whistler and carried on with this other series. And I just included this to show how one way of working that begins so particular to a place, I can continue on with that for a while and exhaust it. And all these drawings I keep my materials very manageable, because there's no point in dragging everything out into a landscape and being so exhausted and stuck to your paint that you get nowhere. So I have 24 by 30 paper taped down so no wind can whip it away, and then a small box of tools, primarily charcoal, Conte, and a few pastels. And that's what sort of provides my color for these drawings. And, people have asked in the past, well, are they just sketches for the final work? And they have that role, but drawing to me is a very it's an end point into itself. Drawings offer very beautiful work in their own right, and there's something very pure about a drawing, because when you're drawing from life, obviously you're going to be drawing from life, the hand-eye coordination is not interrupted in any way. It's a very fluid, uninterrupted thing. You draw for an hour, have 5 minutes passed, have an hour passed. You really can't tell. And really it's when you do become conscious of the time, you realize the drawing exhausted. A painting is different. You're always reaching over to mix up another paint. Oh, I don't have enough of that color. I've got to go back. Don't like that color. I've got to go back. So it's a very different practice. So I value my drawings as entities unto their own right. But of course, they are a source for my paintings as well. So these are some of the paintings that came out of that. And it's interesting, I can imagine all of you can visualize that Whistler landscape. It's packed with foliage. It's a solid field of texture, color. I think drawing allows you to edit back and go to what's sparing and what embodies what's most important to me. And I usually avoid some of these more traditional vistas of landscape. But these, I was quite intrigued by the way the light worked on these, and just the notation of the little bits of, it's really primarily shadow and stuff that define the landscape. And then again, back working, school teaching is an amazing process. It's you know, you don't want to sound cliche, but it is humbling, and it's also totally inspiring, because you know, you have this, each year it's a new wave of energy, and you know, for me to be able to share my love of what I do, I see is almost integral to, you know, the how-tos of it all. Or because, you know, I had the good fortune to run into people who made me believe this was possible. And I think that's you don't know what people's backgrounds are coming from, and to have your teacher actually doing it, I always felt was a part of my role as a teacher to them, that I actually practiced. I just didn't speak the word. So again, another year, this was a very spontaneous little opportunity. A friend offered me a place, and another friend was available, and a very good painting friend. We went down to Palm Desert, which I don't know, I had kind of probably formed a funny idea about what that place was. I just pictured golf carts everywhere. But the moment you're out the place, it's like anywhere, stunning landscape. So we went down in January, so, you know, grey, wet, Vancouver, and here this, you know, we found it was on it was a national park, and it was an oasis, and we just settled ourselves down there and drew from that. And it's a body of work I really loved, but it kind of had nowhere to go, because in a way it didn't really have much place in my real life when I came back to Vancouver. So these were really just for me. But what an amazing, you know, landscape. That's my painting friend over there. A sense of scale. And again, you're struck by the light. After that point, you know, teaching, everything, you know, you're a daughter, Highland dancing every weekend. Life got busy. And I found myself being more interested in working closer to home. And I guess I was kind of almost probably maturing as well, in a sense that all I need, in a way, is right under my nose. And one of my you know, most beloved artists, Ivan Hitchens, he pretty much never left his garden. We all know Monet's repetition of doing haystacks and stuff. I mean, we can look at something at different hours of a day, every days of the year, you know, months. It's always going to be different, and it's different because you're different, you're looking at it differently, and it's evolving as well. So I had the opportunity to go and stay on Pendurn. You know, the fellow who offered me it said, well, you know, it'll be a good base, you can travel all around the island and draw. Well, I didn't leave the place. I just drew his garden, and it seemed to say enough about Pendurn to me, rather than, you know, going to different beaches and stuff. And it was a very interesting time. I was not well at that point, and you know, quite seriously ill. So it really was, in some sense, a sorting ground. I was thinking about, you know, there was the distinct chance that I wasn't going to be around, and what, you know, your life, you know, my life really is encapsulated in paintings. If I look at any painting throughout my past, I can tell you what I was doing at that moment in time. A bit like you know, no different than a writer, somebody writing a piece of music. They've pulled on everything within themselves, distilled what's going on in the world outside, and then it's channeled in their particular way of expressing themselves. So this little series were from there. They do seem to have a sort of little melancholic, well, not completely melancholic, but they're little isolated chairs. but it was amazing to sort of work there. And, you know, some days it was snowing, and my friend that gave me the place, he was an artist too, and he just built a series of little cabins in the garden. I think it was to get around planning permission or something. And so it was just, I just go from one little cube that would give me a bit of protection while I sat and did these paintings. And you know, sometimes the snowflakes were landing on it, and then times it would be glaring sunshine, and I just mixed it all into the paint. I think at this point, I really could just say I then was just carrying on, moving whenever I was, you know, in good shape. This is actually after I knew that I was going to be okay. So I started to sort of carry on with these paintings, and they came about more and more about as a sort of me reflecting on you know, just my life, what decisions I've made, and decisions I made in my painting career, you know, they just all come through there. But it's not, I could never, or would really be particularly interested in working purely abstractly. I do want that bouncing off point, and I do want the imagery to be my own. I'm not terribly interested in gleaming information from otherwhere else, where, you know, obviously it's created wonderful works of art, but it's not something that's motivated me. I have to be embedded in it. But of course it moves off into forms of abstraction to varying degrees. And painting, to me, I haven't really spoken too much about that. Painting is the most exciting of processes, but it's about losing it and pulling it back. And I think we lose focus on life, but we pull it back in. To me, a painting is, I like that struggle. I never draw on a canvas to know, you know, oh, I'm going to have this cloud here and this there. It just goes on with a big wash of paint, and then I take it from there, and those things get washed over. And you know, sometimes I'll just deliberately go in. If I feel a painting's going along too smoothly, I almost will interrupt it quite deliberately with a big jarring splash of paint, or you know, giving it a glaze of a completely different color and then trying to recover the initial. So I'm led by the paint as much as anything. Maybe go, oh yeah, oh dear, where are we going? So yes, that was the end of that series. And you know, that was a very busy painting at one point, but I got it to the point that I just painted all of this out and thought, that's actually, you know, that little edge of the water is actually just what interests me as much as anything. Let me see where we go now. Yes, so these are the paintings that were in, these were in the Winchester show, weren't they? So these are the more current ones. And they began, like I was saying, when I began a series of drawings in Whistler, that set me up for that body of work. But it also I moved into others from there. And the Winchester ones, this place, were definitely a product of that. And they came out of the body of work I did when I initially arrived in Victoria. And I mean, you know, when you come to Victoria, it's like, you know, well, they call it Eden, don't they? It's like there's so much to look at, so many beautiful coastlines, rivers, manicured landscapes, wild landscapes. You're stuck for choice. So in just walking and exploring, I came across Mount Tomley and just became, I was really taken with it. I think the initial thing was I had a great memory of being in the forest of Fontainebleau outside Paris, really when in my school years. And those Gary Oaks and that light, it seemed to me, it was like a great memory of some of the lovely Barbizon painters that came out of there. But, and you know, it was through walking, I should go back, no, I'm not going back there. The drawings here, I spent hours up there. I went through seasons, started off, it's bare, it's grey, it's cold. Signs of life start coming through in spring. It's like, oh, can't you see anything? There's so much growth. And then this kind of fall time when the colors are dying, and I really got to know the place, and walking is actually an important part to all that. And when you think about, I love, in fact, interestingly, Nan Shepherd, her writing on the Cairngorms in Scotland, she actually lived very close to me when I was growing up, but I obviously didn't know about her at the time. But her writing about thoughts and what's going on in the world when walking through the landscape, same with Bruce Chatwin and Rob, the more recent writer, Robert McFarlane. I really identify with the way they see and understand the landscape. It is an eye unto a bigger world and a distilling point. So from these drawings, I did this was a show called Filtered that I had at the Alyssa Crystal Gallery in Vancouver, a gallery I've shown with many times. And for me, about, what is a show? It's it's kind of a funny thing, really, but it's really a cohesive body of work. It represents a kind of a conclusion of a period of investigation and how I have responded and interpreted that. These are those great big rocks, our wonderful landscape where the rock and then the foliage somehow miraculously hangs on to that. And so I did a lot of paintings from these. It was quite, sometimes it's interesting just to share, to change a different perspective, because, very kind of historically constructed, built the horizon, whatever. But when you work in a different shape, you do kind of change that, a little portal into the landscape. And these were the bigger worked ones, lots of memory in there. And the painting went through many, many palettes, but ended up here. And that is the conclusion. That takes me full circle back to the current paintings. Did I mean to do that? I don't know. Oh yes, that's where it is. So I don't know what I've missed out, but I think that maybe it covers a lot of it. Carol Ann, would this be a good moment to maybe take some questions so I could expand on anything if that was required?
Yes, this is a perfect moment for questions.
Okay.
Thank you. I think there are questions. Perhaps, are there questions? Remember to take yourself off mute if you have a question.
Yes, I do have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have seen your wonderful show, Lesley, at Winchester, and I was absolutely stunned by the strength and the drama of your landscapes. And I'm a painter myself, so actually I have two questions. I'm wondering, how do you keep your charcoal drawings, and I think even charcoal in your paintings, so clean? I also use charcoal and it becomes very messy. Pastels as well, particularly when you are on the road. So that's my first question. And then my second question, do you ever also paint the figure or the humans in your landscape, or different subjects altogether?
Well, your first question, the drawings outside, I would fix them with fixative. I would give them a spray.
You take it with you.
What's that?
You take it with you on your outings to fix it them.
I'm hearing you a little bit broken up. Say that again.
when you go out painting on your trips, you take your
Yes.
fixative with you?
I'm not hearing the last bit.
Do you take the fixative with you?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh, yeah. And I would just do a light spray. And I usually would have a piece of paper that goes on top of it. And then it just goes into the boot of the car or whatever. And I just try and keep everything so there's no friction till I get home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then on the painting, there's actually not much charcoal on a painting. That's me just starting to use paint in a kind of more drawing linear type way.
Mm-hmm.
And the other question, what was the other question?
If you ever do other subjects like the figure or use the figure in the landscape.
Right, good question. You know, I did early on, and it's interesting. I toy with it, and the last lot I actually did think I would introduce a figure, but I just painted it out. So it's something I grapple with. I think I am the figure. You're in the figure in my painting when you look at it. I think that's maybe the way I see it. And I did do a series of urbanscapes from when I was living in Vancouver, if you wanted to see them on my website. And I really enjoyed, I enjoyed them, but I am definitely, I think it's the whole thing that I walk a lot. And you know, I walk, that's very compatible with drawing, and that's just a sort of natural pattern that I have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Where do you live now?
I'm in Victoria.
Oh,
Yes, I moved over 3 years ago. And I think, you know, I did have that written down. You know, COVID has forced us all to slow down and see what's really around us, not just a coded understanding of how to move through space, but genuinely looking. And I think that is kind of what's at core of my work, is a real sustained look. You know, the artist Joseph Albers called it visual empathy. And I think, you know, just looking at something over and over, you find great order in that. And the drawing process supports that, edits, you know, I edit my surroundings, and it offers a structure to provide the paint to morph and evolve fluidly as I grapple with retaining the essence. It's a process that allows for the filtering of ideas, readings, conversations, as organizing my life, and the paint takes on a direction unto itself. So yeah.
I have another question. Do you paint every day, and do you have a schedule that you kind of keep to? You paint so many hours a day, or?
No, I had a strict schedule when I was teaching. You know, my days off were precious and firm. Now that I'm not doing that, it's a bit more organic. So, you know, round about March, when the COVID first started kicking off, that coincidentally was me settling down to do a body of work. I had a commitment of an exhibition with Winchester. I'd done all my preparatory drawings up to that point. I'd, you know, been on a painting trip with some fellow painters to Salt Springs. So I had all my work. At that point, once I went into the studio, I had a regime that I stuck to. And, you know, I like working like that for a sustained period of time, but I don't think I could sustain it all year. Although some people just go into the studio and maybe read or be around their paintings. They're not necessarily physically always doing work. And I think that's something I could probably more and more do. But no, I don't keep a regular routine until I'm immersed in a body of work, and then that routine just naturally forms.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
have a question.
Are there any other questions? Because I can't see everybody, I have to rely on you to take yourself off mute and speak up if you do. Okay. If not, then I would like to thank you very much, Lesley, for sharing with us your beautiful work and giving us such an eloquent inside glimpse into how you work, your inner and outer landscape. It's very special to hear about your approach and your concepts and your inspiration and your excitement in the wonders of the landscape. And thank you for those beautiful images, the singing belugas, and the movement, the landscape moving. I had not thought about that before. So I hope this is the beginning of a great friendship between you and the Gallery Associates.
It will, certainly.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you very much for inviting me, and enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Thank you, and we'll let you escape.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Thanks, everybody.